But is he not? Action! Hey guys, this week Jordan and I talked about Shiloh Ranch Church, the history, the mission, the vision, the whole story of Shiloh Ranch. It's really cool. He actually went over some stuff that I had no idea about, and I've been here for 3 years. So hope you guys like it. Share it with a friend, and see you guys later. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Mr. Jordan Weaver, how are you?
Jacob McLane.
I'm great.
Oh, this is becoming one of the one of the highlights of my week. I feel like we're finally getting like a rhythm. I'm enjoying it. Mm-hmm. And Lacey pointed out, she's like, when Arizona happens, that's it for the podcast for a while.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out. I don't know.
Do it through a Zoom or something.
Yeah, we could actually.
Is it weird that in 2020 we're actually seeing each other in person? Because everybody else, like the only time you see faces on a screen. So
yeah, no, that's cool. I enjoy.
It's weird to see people.
Yeah,
like you said, Zoomer's weird because you only see the screen. I'm like, oh, weird. There's nothing.
There's nothing there.
It's like, take your
the topic today.
Okay,
is the vision and mission and history of Shiloh Ranch Church. So we did a podcast about the 1017 project,
right?
And it was cool because a lot of people actually didn't know a couple of those things that we said, and and it's something to point people to if they have questions. So I thought that let's do that for Shiloh too.
It's hard. I'm glad you're doing that because it's hard for me to gauge sometimes how much people know or don't know.
Right.
But then I think back to like churches that I've visited or stuff like that. Like I don't know anything about the history of how it started. Mm-hmm. When I was a teenager, we went to a church that's literally 100 years old. So the connection to like the launch point, none. No, I mean, I guess if you went back and looked like in the records or something, you could figure out who started and stuff like that. But I think it's possible a lot of people wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, I don't know anything. If there's another church you walk into, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, about Shiloh, I know,
gotcha,
but like,
gotcha. Yeah, I see.
Church. First question is, when did Shiloh Ranch start, and what were the circumstances that led your family to Powell, Butte?
So, Lacey and I got married in 2007, and we would come up here rodeoing in the summers. Like we would come up every summer and just like get out of the heat and go rodeo for a while. And we were actually talking about that the other day. It's crazy. We wanted to make a better living when we were younger, and we had freedom with our time. And so we would spend that time being broke up here rodeoing in the summers. And like there's one summer we were so broke we didn't have enough fuel money to get back to Texas. And so we had to paint Wade and Dana's house. They paid us to paint their house. But what we saw when we were here is I had no desire to pastor a church. None, like genuinely none. Grew up in the ministry family. My dad pastors, my uncle pastors, my grandpa was pastor forever. And the only thing that was so frustrating is it seemed like just such good people and such a perfect opportunity for someone to have a church that was a little bit outside the bounds of like a traditional city model. And so we would talk about like, man, somebody needs to start a church. Cause we come up here and we go to church. It's not that the churches were bad, but they weren't places like my friends would go. Right. Like when people were in the area, I didn't feel like there was a place that culturally there was really a connection point. And yet there's tons of, just blue collar people. And when people say, cowboy church, they call it the cowboy church or whatever. It's not even a cowboy thing. It's literally like a lifestyle. It's a culture. I was talking to Steve Stone today, and he said, as a lead pastor, when you say that you oversee culture, what that means is as the lead pastor, as the dad of a family that determines culture, what you're saying is, this is what's important to us, and this is what isn't. That's all that culture is. Culture is saying, this is important, this isn't. And it didn't feel like that there was a church that was saying, blue collar, dirt under your fingernails type people, that's going to be our main focus. It was like, okay, this is going to be our focus, but if those people want to come, great. But it's not like our number one priority. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I would say, Lacey and I, we weren't really sure where we were going in life. I'd worked for my dad, and I wasn't, I was working in the oil field for a little while. Wade, Lacey's dad, had moved down there, and we were just young. I mean, early 20s, trying to kind of just figure out life. And so, in 2010 or 11, we started talking about like, we knew people that were pastor types. We're like, perfect. We'll just tell them about it, and they'll come up there and they'll start a church,
right? And
then we'll have a church to go to when we're in Oregon. It'll be great. We'll love it. And like Lacey's family, I knew they would go. Like I know Wade, because he'd lived with us down there. like a church where Wade would feel comfortable. That's what's lacking. We will tell people about it. They'll come up here. They'll plant a church. Everything's gonna be good. So he spent like 2 years trying to get somebody like, hey, you don't understand. Like, it's ready. Like, I know church. And that community, it needs it so badly. And it wasn't people that are bad people at all. It was people that didn't find a home in church, thus weren't really connected to a church. They would definitely. So anyway, I'm giving you the long version.
Yeah.
But in 2011, we were sitting there at another church, and I looked around. I was the only one wearing a baseball cap. And then it's like one of those things. Once you realize that you're the only one, then it's like all you can see. You're like, oh, great. You know, then you feel like you're sticking out. So we're walking out of that church, and I told Lacey, we're there with Wade, Lacey's dad, and I said, you know, even if you and I have to start one, somebody's got to do something. Like, there are so many people that are just being missed in Central Oregon because the options are so narrow. They're so specific. Lots of churches, but they're all very specific.
Those are dangerous words.
Oh man. I promise you, like, even if we have to do it ourselves. And Lacey's dad goes, get in the truck. And we're like, I meant like hypothetically, you know, like someday, right? Like, and so he takes us out to Brasada. And by the time we got to Brasada, I wasn't really familiar with Central Oregon. By the time we got there, it felt like we'd been driving for an hour. And I'm like, Wade, I mean, listen, I appreciate it. You know, I'm the expert, right?
Right.
No one would drive this far. You know, this is out. He goes, no, trust me. I know it seems like it's out in the middle of the nowhere. It's not. It's right. You know, now being where we are, this feels like kind of in the main thoroughfare. Mm-hmm. That still feels like it's out in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. To me, how that was a church. Anyway, so I called the number. This is how connected we were. I just called the number on the door. They're like for booking or whatever. So I call and I was like, this is literally, we're 45 minutes after I said like, maybe we could do it.
Right.
45 minutes later, I'm calling and I go, hey, my name is Jordan Weaver. I'm not from here, but you know, I didn't know if anybody had ever approached you guys about maybe having a church service or something. And like dead silence. Have you heard this story before?
Yeah, but
dead silence. And I'm like, I thought maybe they hung up on me or something. And this lady starts crying. Her name was Sue. And she was doing what Carrie Jo does now. And she goes, I've been begging God to send a church like what we know exists in other places. And she goes, I can't believe that I'm getting this phone call. And so like, I was just
just like,
oh no. Cause then like the reality is like, if we do this, that means like that I'm going to be a pastor of a church.
Right.
It's kind of, I swear, it's kind of like that moment when you find out, like you take the test and it's like, oh man, it's positive. We're going to be parents. Yeah. And it's like, I'm not parent material.
Yeah.
So my dad, I called my dad and I was like, here's kind of what we're thinking. And he goes, well, I'll save you the details. Basically, if you want to start a campus of our church, so it'll save you some of the you know, the loops that you have to jump through in other states when you want to start a church. And so we did. We actually started as Shepherd's Valley for the first year. And it was
remember that. Yeah.
It was so hard to try to coordinate two different places and two different visions, two different, again, culture. This is what's important. This isn't. Well, their church was different because Dad's culture is different. And, you know, and so pretty soon it was just one of those things like, we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to do this on our own. But by then we're running, you know, enough people that it was kind of like, what we needed, I guess, to get rolling.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you said the thing about you were the only one with the baseball cap because I grew up in Central Oregon and we would go to churches all the time in different places. And it was always the worst thing because I wore a hat every day, all day, everywhere.
Right.
But then when it was time to go to church, it was, well, you got to take your hat off. And I was always like, I don't like that. I didn't like going to church.
To me, what it felt like to me is it tweaked that thing that had developed in me being a preacher's kid or grandkid. And I think that's actually why I connect as well as I do in this area is that I didn't get the sense that people were anti-God. I got a sense that they were anti-church. And I'm like, me too. And so from the beginning, people would walk in and they would take their hat off and then pretty soon they'd look around and they're like, oh wait, this is cool. Mm-hmm. And man, just there at the cafe, Carrie Jo would leave the cafe open back there. And so people would eat and like the atmosphere was so familiar to people because it was a building they'd been before that I think there were people who were like, I'm not against God. I just have never felt a connection from a cultural standpoint. Yeah. So when I said, this is what's going to be important and this isn't, there were people that are like, that's what's important to us too. That's who we are. That feels like, you know, familiar. And so the hats, as weird as that sounds, hats were really a connection point.
Yeah. And food too. I mean,
Oh man. I mean, that's
so
just
cool.
personal.
Yeah.
I love having food at church.
well, and the idea of every time, no food in the sanctuary, no food or drink in the sanctuary, or something like that, because they want to keep the carpets clean. And I'm like, dude,
my buddy and I were walking into a church service one time, and the pastor's wife, I was probably 17, like height of my disrespectful years anyway. And we're walking, and the pastor's wife's like, excuse me. And I've got like an Arizona tea can. And I just remember just the contempt of like, why do you think that would be okay to bring into church? And I remember thinking like, is this you or is this Jesus?
Yeah.
Because I just don't think Jesus would be at the back door.
Yeah.
Like, how dare you? I think this is you.
Yeah.
Like, and that was such a pivotal, you look back over the years, and that was such a pivotal moment of like, I don't want anybody to ever feel that way. I don't want anybody to ever come to Shiloh and feel like, uh-oh, did I step in the wrong place? Did I go the wrong place? Are we okay? Am I allowed to touch this? Or am I allowed to go there? Like, hey, this is your house. We built the whole building to feel like a residence. Like I wanted people to feel like that they're going to someone's house, and it's like, hey, you can't mess up. Do whatever you need to do. Like, just make yourself at home, because eventually you're going to run into information that makes you uncomfortable. We don't need you to be uncomfortable when you walk in the door.
Right.
Like if Jesus does what he does, you're going to have a lot to deal with, whether or not you're drinking an Arizona tea on your way in. It should be one of them.
Yeah. How did you market, or how did you get people to come? Because the first one was 12 people. Is that right? The first service, if you will.
There was 12 people, and then we started on Monday nights in April. So we went on Monday nights, and I remember Robert Buckner. This is one of my favorite Robert Buckner stories, because Robert, God love him, was like, we'd met in Texas before we came up, Wade had introduced us. And so Robert said, hey, like he's there like 4 or 5 weeks in. And he's like, hey, because he's from here, like he's a local. And he's like, have you thought about, maybe putting some like flyers or something? And I was like, oh, no, glad you asked. No, we're not trying to grow yet. And he was like, okay, because you're doing a good job.
Okay.
I was like, we don't want to grow yet. We want to make sure that we know how to get through a service, because attending church is one thing when you're in charge of literally front to back and all of it. And so what we didn't want to do is 2 weeks in, everybody comes in the door. I always felt like people would show up. I always knew people would come, but I didn't want them to show up and then we didn't know what we were doing. And then it's like, ugh. So if we could have the summer to kind of build a core group, build a core following. We launched in September. A lot of people from Dad's church came up, because remember, we were going to be Shepherd's Valley in the beginning. We had a team rope and calf rope and barrel race, and gave away like buckles and breast collars and stuff just to get people in the door.
I didn't even know that.
Here's what's crazy. Bobby Alexander's dad, Bud, had a heart attack and passed away the week that we were going to launch. And he's like this old established rodeo figure, right? He was always like running the barrier and stuff at the amateur rodeos. So he passes away right before the amateur finals, and they're going to have a funeral for him the day we were going to launch. And so it was one of those things of like, no one's going to come. Everybody's going to go to Bud's. We were brand new. Nobody even knew who we were. So what we did is we said, okay, tell you what, let's do like a silent auction that week. We put it all together as a fundraiser for the family, and we'll start a little bit later. So we had church that morning. I think we still had maybe 50 people or something like that, because we had announced it. Scott Johnson, somewhere in there, had showed up. He started advertising in the Rancher about this launch. So like people started to see it. And so we started the roping part of it later, let everybody go to Bud's service. And then after that, everybody came out after. And then we did the silent auction and stuff like that. And so we started with a contribution to the community instead of asking for anything. And so as terrible as Bud's deal was, it allowed us to kind of go like, no, we're not here to try to take away from anything. We want to be here to be a benefit to the people that live here. We want to make sure that people know like, hey, we love you guys, and that we have something we think you're gonna like.
At what point was raising cattle? When did that become an idea, and why was it cattle, not rabbits or sheep or something?
So like I said, we had been around church. I've joked that I'm 37 years old and I've been in church for 38 years. But we'd seen the churches that had started kind of like what we're talking about, the culture, having arena events, things like that. And the way that it would work is that you would lease cattle and pay them back. We talked about this. That financially it just didn't make sense. A church is hemorrhaging money to try to get people on the property. And I was going as crazy as I had suspected that I would being a pastor. I don't feel like it's something that I'm just naturally gifted at in the relational sense. Like I think that I'm an okay dad. I'm not a very good mom to people in the church. Right. And so I was feeling kind of just rummy and tired, and I'm not sure if I'm in the right place in life and that kind of stuff. And the cattle thing actually, and the function of the cattle project, people can go back and watch that. But for me, it was just sort of a lifeline for me so that I could have something that was outside of the building that kept me engaged also. I mean, it was probably more meaningful actually to me maybe than the church for the first couple of years, because it just gave me something to work on that wasn't, you know, like relational or staff related or interpersonal type stuff, because I was just kind of toast on that stuff.
So, but it was a community outreach from the church. I mean, what was?
Well, yeah. I mean, so the food. One of the things I like about food is when somebody walks in. Assume you're going to, and I don't know if this is a good example or not, but just as a I'm just grasping at an idea. But if I was going to go to like an Elks Lodge, I've never been to one. I don't know what they do there. I don't know. I'm telling you, I don't know what it is. I know that they exist. I know nothing about them. But if I was going to go to like one of their gatherings, instantly I'm like, what do I wear? I'm not going to go. It's uncomfortable. Like all the assumption. So if somebody's going through that sort of a scenario, walking into church for the first time, and somebody goes, hey, here's food, then you're like, oh, okay. So I get to eat. Okay. There's just something about like, here, you take this, instead of, hey, here's what we want from you. Right. And so the food from a personal standpoint was such a big thing for me. But then if the church is able to be a food source to a community, we're already farmers and ranchers and cattle people in Powell, Butte anyway. If there was a way to connect the culture, again, what's important, what's not, to the mission of the church, then the two just seemed to kind of make sense to me. And what we didn't know is how needed it was in the community, how big of a deal that was. You know, they're giving out protein packets or peanut butter or just, I mean, and turns out that's a national struggle. That's not just Central Oregon.
When did you move to this building, or what was the process from Brasada to here?
So we had a fundraising, like a farm auction. It was in November of, I want to say 13. So what is that, a year and a half? Like after, like a full year after we officially launched, we outgrew it. Oh, and no, that's not true. It had to have been, might have been like the spring of 14, something like that. Because our first Easter, we had 250 people. We started in September. Our first Easter, we had 250 people. The next Easter, we had 970.
Okay.
That's like our second Easter ever. And we were like, it's time. We were already kind of moving on the property. Jerry Hicks, my aunt and uncle had come out.
Was that Easter in Brasada?
Yeah. We had it out in the arena.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, there was nowhere to sit there. All the seats, I think we had like a bounce house or something set up.
Wow.
But, and for the record, bounce houses are not in my wheelhouse whatsoever. Like that was a real struggle for me to look at, and I would see bounce houses and Easter eggs. I'm like, is this what my life has come to? Okay. Like, is this what I have chosen for myself? Yeah. And everyone's like, this is great. I'm like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. So 970, we'd already started moving. My aunt and uncle had came up, and we kind of looked around for property. Jerry Hicks had been aware, you know, he was coming to Bible study. And so he actually found this place, and he said, I think you could get it for X amount with a tax donation type of a deal. And so he actually is the one that called the guy, put the deal together. We knew about X amount what we needed to have. We had that farm auction. We sold like trucks and guns and pieces of equipment and hay. The whole community came together. It was the craziest thing. The community came together. And we had the auction. It raised enough for the down payment to get us started on the property. And so we put the sign up, and it was off and running. But it wasn't long after we launched it, probably a year. I think we were at Rimrock for like a year and a half, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember coming, we started coming when it was still in Brasada. And I remember a little bit of that time, but when it was here and we were staying in the tent while this was being built.
You know what I think?
I mean, how was that?
I think God gives people a measure of grace to get through a season. Okay. A measure of grace for that season. Because I remember being in the tent, and I was like, we own this ground. This is our ground. There's nothing else, but there was ground. And we're like, that's so crazy. We own this. That's ours. Right. Tom Crabb let us use one of the tents that they'd used at Rodeo Bible Camp. I mean, it was like, we had two tents. We had one tent that was like the children's church. And like, it was the craziest thing, because I'm not kidding. I remember being like, this is kind of cool. Like, it's not Rimrock, but it's us. Like, we don't have to get permission to do this. And we have porta potties, and we don't know what we're doing. And we kind of liked it. And now I think back on it, and I'm like, That was terrible. Okay. That was awful. Like it was cold. Yeah. The wind would flap and things would blow over. There was kids literally like escaping under the tent, like getting away. The little Patty and Scott McLane's kids were just freaking wild. And so we're like, well, we might have lost your kid. He's on the ground, but but that was just, it was a weird thing because it was happening. Like we were doing it. We had started a church and now there were people, and we would have church on Sunday morning and people would pull in, and they're like, for years it was like, I can't believe anybody comes. I'm
curious about like the AV, equipment and stuff. Who was doing that?
This guy,
right? You were setting up speakers and mics
for
and all
for the first 8 months, probably. I was hooking up the sound system. I would put the sound system together and put the microphone up. And we had a kid that would come in and he'd play guitar, but I would set up the sound. I would put the TVs, like plug in the computer. Wow. Like Lacey and I would kind of figure it out. There's a couple people that had come through that were like, oh, I could run the iPad during the service, and like. No, have you ever seen the cartoon where it's like Bugs Bunny and he's playing the cymbals and the drums and the guitar and his ears are playing like the things and like he's walking around, he's the whole band? Right. That was Lacey and I. And Wade and Dana were watching the kids, and it was like, we're doing it. It was an excitement that it was working, but at the same time, like I said, I felt like I was putting bricks. Listen, I'm putting bricks in a circle and it's getting taller and it's working, but I'm also realizing that I'm building a wall around myself. Yeah. And I was like, oh man, I feel called to keep going, and people are happy and the bricks keep showing up and the mortar's sticking, and it's awesome. But I have literally walled myself in. Huh. DJ said the first service in the tent on the new ground was so fun and exciting to watch the church. Absolutely. And that's what's so cool, DJ, is like at the time, people were like, okay, like we're doing it. We started a thing and now it owns something. Like when we were at Rimrock, we were always, Lacey's texted me, and Reed Garcia, the kid that moved up here with us, he would be like sweeping out the restrooms over there at Rimrock, and he was like putting the little tiles together for the children's church, and everybody's jumping in. I remember that. Tell me God, guys. Yeah, keto for sure. But again, at a personal level, it was the weirdest thing because I felt like it was what I was called to do. And it was working, and I felt like excited that it was working. There was probably 3 years that every single Sunday I would be like, is this the week when no one shows up? Is this the week where you look out the driveway and it's like, oh yeah, nobody came this week? I was ready for that. And every week people would pull in, and for years I remember just like, I can't believe they're coming back. I cannot believe people, like, because in my mind, we were so far from where I felt like we were called to be, like kind of what you see now. We were so far from that. But people were so gracious. They didn't care. They got to come to church with their hats on. There was food. They were like, people like us. We're like, finally, there's a church for people like us. And my own theology at the time was still developing. Like I look back on sermons that I preached 7 years ago, and I read it. I'm like, I'm not sure if I even believe that anymore. And people are like, we'll figure it out. No big deal. What can we do to help? It was, I think maybe there was a little bit of pity. Maybe we had a young family and young kids, and like I was pastoring a church. I was 29 years old.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, wild. Yeah. Like now I meet people who are 29. I'm like, you're a baby, like well, here we go. And Lacey was just a trooper. Like she was just like, all right, here we go. She's still that way. Okay, what are we doing? All right, we'll figure it out.
How long did you like do the AV stuff?
Forever.
I mean, like even once the building was set up, like
so Scott Box got there. I'm trying to remember how far into it. We were close to a year when Scott showed up, and Scott and Carrie Ann were just such a godsend at that time. Scott was coming out of some church stuff that he'd been a part of, and we were trying to figure our stuff out. And there was something about that guy. But it wasn't just Scott and Carrie Ann. It was like Robert and Jerry and these people that just kept kind of pouring in and filling in the gaps. And I'm a young guy that's doing a job that I was afraid it was going to work. I was afraid we were going to be successful. And like Scott Johnson putting it in the ads and stuff like that. Lacey's helping me with names. Lacey said, no, we had help with AV. She's remembering that wrong. We did a little bit, but it was us figuring it out. Yeah. We were figuring out the system. Yeah. And like I said, there were people that came through, but it was the weirdest thing because I look back and I ask myself, I'm like, man, if people hadn't propped me up, I got a lot of the credit. Lacey and I got a lot of the credit. Like, you guys had this vision and it worked. If people hadn't jumped in, I don't know if I would have stayed. I don't know if I could have stayed. I don't know if I could have faced discouragement and the difficulty of pastoring. So I was pastoring, but it was like the success was able to kind of keep us rolling, and people, just checking on us and loving on us, and the families that came in. And I think I was probably more of the result than the driver.
So the vision, is a simple path to Jesus, and the mission is kind of to put churches in places who can't.
It's never changed for me since I was about 22 years old. I felt like that I growing up, and I would say if you're watching this, see if this doesn't make sense in people's lives too. And I don't care if you're watching this 6 months from now. It's like the world shows us a demonstration of what a church should look like. And there's crystal chandeliers, and there's reverence, and there's songs, and there's culture. And like, this is where you go to be a part of God's family. But then like on a Tuesday, you're out here and you got your boots on, and you're changing water, or you're doing whatever, and you got grease all over your hands. And it's like, the two separate lives. There's the church me, and then there's the real me, right? I was about 22 years old, and I felt like God said, I will never ask you to live over here. I will always, whatever I'm going to do with you, I'm going to do it with you here. And it was so personal, because I was like, God, I feel like such a hypocrite every time I go to church, because I have to leave who I believe myself to be, and I can't get out of there fast enough. Like I would run out of church on Sunday just to get back to my life. And so I felt like that what the church was going to be, whatever it was, I didn't know exactly how we would get there. But what I did know is I wanted to put a church where people already were, not try to bring people to church. Church in the middle of the road, so that it was somewhere that they felt connected before they ever really, you could belong before you believe. And so that was such a big deal to me, that if God was willing to let me see, like, no, I know that's not you. I would never create you this way and ask you to serve over that way. And if God was willing to do that for me, how could I clearly communicate that? Because I think what people believe is that God lives over here. And when they're just out in their own environment, that they feel like they're far from God. God's going, no, I'm right here. Like God lives right there. And so if he was able to explain that to me, how could I best communicate that? And the only way you can do it, that I could do it at the time, was if I built a church and I said, I promise you, let us build it, and it would see how it looks. It won't look like this. It's going to look like this. So that you can bring your people and your friends. You're like, no, you don't understand. It's fine. It's not like the distant. And what I didn't fully appreciate is how different people that live in the city are from people who don't. There are two different species of humans: city people, rural people, and they speak different languages. And so that was, however we got there, I was not going to let go of my standards that says, I don't care what every other church has done. We are going to build a church. We're going to go find people, and we're going to build a church there. And, we've kind of maybe zigzagged on the steps, but that's something from the very beginning, is like, we want to build a church where people already are.
And when did the media packages or the media become a part of that?
Hang on, I want to read DJ's real quick, because I think that was a little bit later. Growing up a Jehovah's Witness, coming to Shiloh, I was drawn immediately because I always felt like I wasn't being judged, and I was family. Jordan always had a way of personally connecting me with Jesus and his word, so I'm thankful for Shiloh, everything Shiloh's given. You know what I love about DJ? DJ could be in a room and you wouldn't even know he's there. He just quietly comes in. You can tell like he is family. Like DJ's been there from the beginning, and he'll quietly leave. Like he's just one of those people that is just such a quiet, confident presence, and I love it. I mean, you look out there and if DJ, if it helps, it feels like home when you're there too. I don't recall in the Bible starting a building fund. He used hills, people's homes, boats. Look what you've done. We built a building. No, but that's the same idea. The same idea is like we wanted to build a residence that felt okay. So fast forward, I built a wall around myself, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Right. I mean, it wasn't that I was unhappy, but I've never felt like that this was the all-encompassing vision of everything God was going to call me to in my life. Build it and they will come. You have an amazing way of getting the word out. Thank you. So we started kind of pushing on the wall. Like I felt like we built it. The building's done. The people are here. They can see it. The cattle project's working. And there's that feeling of like, I'm done. I'm done. I built all this, but there's nowhere for me to sit down, so to speak. I built a wall around myself, and Lacey and I were going through weird, both of us being spiritually tired and physically tired. There's no kind of tired that can compare to finishing something. Mm-hmm. And I felt like we had finished. And so even now I can say that at the end of 2015, we finished the season of farm auctions. Everybody come together so we can barely survive. Let's just try to get something done. It was good. Okay, it's done. And it was like, okay, are we done? Is this where I go home to Texas? Is this where I go further? Because if I go further, what does that look like? Steve Stone. Hey, so you and me are going to talk about my conversation with Steve Stone, but God has brought that guy into my life. I'm so grateful for that guy. But so we started just kind of pushing, and that's where the Weatherford idea started. It was like, okay, well, we could do this in other places too. Mm-hmm. But that's as far as we didn't know. It was, we really believed that if we were to create this sort of a build it where they are sort of a thing, Weatherford made sense. We had some things that we really liked about the area. The culture was it was a good fit, but we didn't know what we were doing. But what we did know is we didn't want to build this church over here, right? So really, when you start looking at a rural, a way to multi-site rural, the rules are different. My wife's texting me. I'm missing details, and she's going to fill me in. So we knew that we needed to start a second campus, but I couldn't exactly put in the words why. I've always said I can't always tell you what it is, but I can tell you when I see it. And really nobody's doing rural multi-site. And the reason nobody is really doing rural multi-site is we're handshake people. We're face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact people. And so when you start trying to do multi-site, you're personally less connected, right? And so Weatherford, what we did, the idea was we would bring people from the area. They're, solid in ministry. They've been in ministry, and that we would go that way. And I will tell you, it absolutely worked. It 100% worked. I don't know if you know this or not. We hit 100 people once in Weatherford. But what we didn't realize is from a sustainability standpoint, what we needed to plan for. So it got there, and we're like, this is taking too much of all of our everything. Like, the culture is different between the people we brought in and then us. And like instantly we saw like, this is not going to work. It's not going to work, not because the idea was bad, but because the approach was it wasn't right. Mm-hmm. So when Weatherford failed, everybody else was like, oh man, oh dang it. I was like, no, I'm good. I'm fine. I don't care. It could have failed 1,000 times. What I learned in Weatherford was the video thing was going to be so important, because I couldn't just be gone for a month. And people are like, Powell, you're like, what are we doing? And then the church is brand new in Weatherford, and I'm not there. And they're like, wait, what are we doing? It had to be clear. And so everybody else everybody who's patting me on the back about like, oh, well, dang it. But I was like, I don't care. We got a plan. We leave from there. Jerry and Kim Hicks had said, we think that the idea of what you're doing makes sense where we've been in Wickenburg. We love it there. Here's what it is. Here's the opportunity that we see. And so Lacey and I, coming out of this weird season of like, are we done in 2015? Weatherford not working the way that we had hoped, feeling like a failure in a sense, because like, we're Weavers, we've never killed a church before. I'm the first. They didn't give me a badge or ribbon or anything. But when we got to Arizona, we already had the AV idea set up, established, knowing that that's the direction I was going to have to go. And that's where you guys, God, of course, had you and Levi come in, and like, I don't know any better way to describe it, how it felt. It felt to me like you weren't. This is not insulting at all, just from my mindset. It was like 2 12-year-olds coming in going, we'll learn it if you let us. And I'm like, you think? Yeah. You think? So, but you did. And what's so crazy about that is that God had positioned, you weren't 12. I mean, you were older, but it was crazy. It's like, God brings you guys in, the video thing starts to work. And I did some live and some video in Wickenburg that first year, and it was working, but it actually was worse when I was live there. And I think what it was the freedom that God's going like, no, I want this to be a video, because if this works as a video, that can be replicated literally anywhere. But I felt like responsible, like, no, I need to be there and I got to do it live. And God's like, you don't have to. You can be there, but this is a video campus. And so if this is a video, you can replicate that in 1,000 other places. And Wickenburg, the doors are blown off of it. It's been great. I mean, we're going into our 4th winter. It's working. Let me say it this way. I failed into it. Weatherford failed because we didn't really understand how to make it sustainable. I knew that we could get it. I just didn't know how to sustain it. That's what killed Weatherford. So the Arizona piece, the sustainability was already pre-built into it. And so now it's peaceful. Like when we go down there in the winters, we're still working on it because that's our model that has to be replicated in these other areas, but it's peaceful. You know, like our schedule in the summers is just unsustainable. We're going to have to slow down. I'm going to tell you, Lacey and I are going to have to slow down a little bit. We've got so many things going on right now, but Arizona is like, we could do that. It's sustainable. We're at peace. Like we get along, things are good. It's like, we're back to a good place again because of what the video campus allows.
Yeah. I've heard you said, don't let me put words in your mouth, but something along the lines of we need less preachers and more communities.
Yeah. Can I read that comment real quick?
Absolutely.
It says, I was saved at Shiloh, moving from Oregon to Montana, and having to leave Shiloh was the hardest part of my move. I thank God for allowing me to be able to steer others' message through Jordan at the online campus. See, everybody, there's this battle. And now imagine the challenge in their defense. Like, listen to what I'm saying. Like, in their defense, these people that are tasked with church management in a district or a region or a state, they've got two different kinds of churches. One that has a lot of people and one that has a few people. And the one that has a few people is kind of closed off and rural, and it's kind of hard to access, and they're not like the most open, and it's like digging in rock. But this thought is like, you send pastors out there just hoping for something that'll work, and everything just keeps failing. Well, what you're doing accidentally is that you're creating, you're inoculating them to the gospel, which says every time somebody comes out here, the church fails, until there's almost a resistance to it. So my thought was, you don't need more pastors. You don't need to send more leaders out to rural America to fail. You don't need that. What you need is a community and a group of people that can sustain a meeting place. When you look at what Tracy's doing, shout out Tracy. She's at Silver Lake. You look at what the Burleys are doing in Adel. These are people that live there already, and they go, we could kind of host a gathering of people. Imagine that. You don't have to have a salary for a lead pastor. Because if you send a lead pastor out to a small community, he's not going to make a lot of money. He's not going to have enough salary to really grow and feed his family. So he leaves. And the church goes, well, we're not going to trust them again. But if it's no money, like it's literally the sustainability of a small church in rural America that can be set up to succeed with a gathering or a group of people at $0. If they're running 5 or 10 people, great. That's awesome. If it's someone who's trying to pay a salary, he's going to do whatever he can do to grow because he's trying to feed his kids. I don't blame him. But if you can send it out to a gathering of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, there is not a size that's too small. And if somebody watches it in their home, like these families that are in these areas, they send it to an uncle or a cousin or a friend or whatever. Specifically Wickenburg, so many people from all over come to Arizona for the winter, and then they go home. And so you look at what our online campus has done. It's just exploded from Wickenburg because they go, I found this church. I know the people. It feels relational. It feels personal. But then when I go home, and church isn't something that I can get to real easily because I live out where I live, they take it back with them. And Arizona has become a choke point for people who go, man, this feels like a church I want to go to.
And you faced resistance to that.
You know, though, I used to get really resentful, and I'm petty. I'm by nature, I'm such a petty person. If somebody tells me it's not going to work, I'm like, oh yeah. And then I'll work extra hard to make sure it works so that I can go back and kind of rub in their face. That's my knee. I'm not that way. I'm saying that's how I could be.
Right.
In people's defense,
okay,
anything that's new is going to catch resistance.
Right.
People are like, I don't understand it that way. I don't necessarily like it that way. I prefer it to be this way or that way. And it used to really bug me because I'm like, so what's your plan? There's not one. What's working? Nothing. So why don't we try it my way? And I think I've kind of softened on that. And I think part of that comes with, like I said, I was 29 when the church started. I was a kid.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think the resistance was, we've never seen it done that way. There's no guarantee it's going to work.
And so we were doing the media stuff in Wickenburg and Adel, Silver Lake. Maybe Silver Lake didn't start, but I think they did actually. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, all right, just flip the switch, right? Just turn it on because we've already been doing it.
Well, and I think the timing, I don't mean to cut you off, but the timing was we couldn't have turned it on before because we were breaking attendance records every week before COVID. So like, why would you come in at a time where things are rocking and rolling and doing well and like pivot shift away to a new idea. You couldn't do it. But then COVID hits, and it's like we had been ready to sort of take that step, but I think we have all been so busy managing. You know, we're a town. Our town is like a gas station and a charter school. That's our whole town.
Right.
And we're running between 500 and 600 people on a weekend, and they're like, "Where are these people coming from?" And it's like, how could we have pivoted to live online? We were so busy with what we were doing. So COVID hits, and it's like our congregation dials back because you can't meet in person. But it's like it brought everybody to the same platform. Now, instead of Shiloh happening and sending it over there, Shiloh happening and sending it over there, now all of a sudden it's like, hey, everybody jump in. And it was, the timing of it was so unique because it was like you and Levi and Mary and everybody that had been working on that team, Chris, Eric, you know, all these people. It was like we had been prepared. We were ready when God said go. And it was because of what had started actually. Well, Jordan, I'm really sorry about Weatherford. And I'm like, don't be. Don't be. That's the thing that like set the stage for where we're at. So no, don't be sorry. That was because of what happened in Weatherford. We were ready that when COVID hit, I mean, it was what do we have? How much time do we have to go live? I think I did one on an iPhone because Cassie Emerson, God bless you, Cassie, if you're watching. Cassie Emerson, I think she works for the Cowboy Channel now, but she set us up, remember, with that like live thing because we were in Wickenburg because it all got shut down. The next Sunday, we're here and it's live and we're going. I mean, it was like a 1 week crash course.
Yeah, that was crazy. I was actually.
You were in DC.
Yeah, I was in DC when it was like everything was getting. So we actually came home a day early because
we wouldn't call you because I'm married and my wife is a better person. Lacey's like, do not call Jacob. And I'm like, I feel like this would be okay. And she's like, don't do it. So we called Levi. Levi had it to where we knew like, hey, worst case scenario, this is the thing that we have. And then you come home and you're like, then we got this. And I was like, we knew it was going to be okay before you got back. And then you got back and we tested everything. You guys were testing it while I was still in Arizona. And then you guys were testing it. And I could see I was going to look and I'm like, this is going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. It was crazy. It was almost like it had to go really, I mean, like everything.
We had to because like we set the studio up in the church. We couldn't have done that if there was 500 people.
Right.
Couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Gladys said, never been to Shiloh in person, but you have saved me with online services, the words and the sermons and messages. That is what I'm talking about. Jesus can reach people anywhere. Do you know, I had a friend one time, he was all strung out on drugs and he's laying in his living room floor and all he said was like, I don't even know if I believe in you. I don't even know if I believe in you. But if you're there somewhere, could you help me? That was how I got saved. And so my point is like, that when people hear who Jesus is and what the word says and that Jesus loves them and that it's personal and that God is a good God and the foundation of the gospel is that he loves us. Like, I know that we love live. Everybody loves live. But what we miss out on live, we open doors to people that haven't been here in person. Okay. Our Silver Lake gathering is so grateful for the ability to have the time, real-time video, keep up with Shiloh. Lives are being impacted the most amazing way. Do you know it's at the Cowboy Dinner Tree?
Yeah.
Like one of the most iconic, cool
I've never
buildings.
been there.
What?
Yeah. No. Everybody talks about that. What is it? Giant steak?
Oh, dude. No, I'm not going to tell you anything until you go.
Okay.
Will you talk about the service format? There is a place for confession and forgiveness of sin within service. Why isn't it included? Diana Larson. So I grew up, Diana, where every service ended with the salvation. You pray this, you say this, you confess your sins, and if you don't confess your sins a certain way, it was like very, very formatted. So Diana, to answer your question specifically, my thought is this. If a drug addict can lay on his floor, strung out on drugs, no contact with a pastor, no contact with a preacher, no contact with anybody that was a qualified leader, and go, God, if that's who you are, if I don't even know if I believe in you, then my point is, if we lay the gospel out in a way that expresses a simple path to Jesus, me screaming about sin is bad, you need to repent, will never outweigh the Holy Spirit going, come on in. Like if there's something that's a specific sin that needs addressed as far as the confession and forgiveness of sin within a service, that's the gospel. The gospel is that Jesus comes in, makes himself so real that it becomes relational. And it says it's the goodness of God that draws people to what? Diana, if you're out there, you finish this sentence for me. It's the goodness of God that draws people to repentance. So rather than this is what you need to do and this is the format and this is how you have to do it, I want to make the gospel so easy to understand that people have an appetite, and it's like salt that draws people into an appetite to the gospel because it's the relational stuff. I cannot tell you how many times I apologized for my sins. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't stop. I could not stop sinning when I was a kid. I just could not live for God. I used to tell people my Christian bone was broken. And I'm going to tell you, like, it was like, you know, confession and forgiveness, confession, forgiveness, confession, forgiveness. And I was on my way to hell with confession and forgiveness. It wasn't until I got a hold of Jesus and said, the screw ups are not my problem. The problem is I don't know you. I don't know you well enough. And I'll only trust you with my successes, and I hide my failures. If I can trust you with my successes and my failures and all of it, and bleh, that was where it took root for me. And so I don't know if that's a full answer, Diana Larson, you can jump in. The gospel is that is the gospel. You're not going to undo your sin. You're not going to quit sinning. You're not going to get better at controlling your sin. It's not about behavior modification. And to Keto's point, we do have prayer rooms in the back. Like if the service is over and they have questions, like it is available. Right. Like it's not like we're trying to avoid it, but it's not about behavior modification. It's about literally getting a glimpse of the Jesus described in the Gospels, where people are like, okay, so there is a place for me here. This isn't God over here with the golden crystal chandeliers and the rules and the modification. Jesus is going to go help me move water this morning, and we're going to begin to work it out based on what the word says.
Right.
It's
interesting was that like public stuff? I don't think I've ever been a part of a service or anything that's like,
like at the end, like, okay, you're going to pray this, or like the altar calls and stuff like that. And I'm not against them at all.
It happened one time. I mean, not like,
we had a guy, we didn't even ask. He stood up and walked to the front and like just put it all out there. And it was a powerful moment.
I was there.
Men, remember? And I go, all right, men, like if this is where like God's leading us. And so I would so much rather reserve a space that if God wants to do something like crazy, like he did right then, because it's happened, but I don't want to turn it into a format. I don't like formats.
Yeah. It actually, I mean, the public stuff is uncomfortable for me.
You know, that's a weird one because it turns into a performance. Like if you're going to ask for forgiveness, you get up and come to the front right now. There's so many different ways like people feel either obligated. It can get weird. Pretty soon it's the same lady. We had a lady when I was a little kid. I was little, the church we went to. She would get up and she would scream in tongues every single Sunday. To bring your friends to that. Like I was familiar with it, so I was like, okay, there she goes again. Yeah. But
there was one time I went to a place, Levi was actually there with me for that, where they handed out little vials of oil, and they're like, the Spirit passes through friends. So you were supposed to like do this and then rub your friend's forehead with the oil,
like,
yeah, kind of deal.
Star is Born.
And it was weird because I didn't, and then people were like, I was just like, nah, I'm good. And then they were trying to touch me, and I was like, dude, don't.
They're like, oh, hope it's still funny when you're in hell.
Yeah, literally, kind of that response.
I've got my grandpa's keychain that he kept on him all the time, and there's a little vial of oil where he would anoint people with the oil, and so it's my roots. Like I get it. It just wasn't. It wasn't talking about culture. What's important and what's not. What's important to me is I want to see Jesus in such a way that I operate in a spiritual power. That if I walk by somebody and I sense that something's going on, that the Holy Spirit is guiding me back, hey, is everything good? Providing food for people that don't go to church is such a big deal to me. And so it's just little variances. Of course, Timothy Keller said every denomination has certain cultural strengths and weaknesses. And so if we really want to encompass the nature of Jesus, all the denominations are necessary. And so that's what's so interesting is when somebody comes in from a denomination over here and they go, you're not doing it right.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that, the times I've actually, because the public stuff will turn me away so much so that I'm so concerned with what people are seeing that I'm not actually paying attention to the Spirit or anything like that. I know that works for some people of, a collaborative thing, but the times I felt, Jesus, the heaviest is in private times or with a couple people.
Definitely. Based on the intimate person of Jesus.
Right. And I feel like personally, that's what I want. That's my heart for the media stuff.
Yeah. The people are having that intimate moment.
I mean, I think of it as, almost like an underground thing.
Yeah.
of hey, listen, you can believe, you can think, you can do whatever you want.
Right.
I'm just going to set this here. You do with it what you want.
See, and I think that's important to clarify, because if we don't do certain things, people could go, well, are you against them? No. There's so many things that I'm not against that I also don't do.
Right.
My goal was to create a safe space for Jesus to have an encounter, a culture of people, a group or a community of people. I had a lady get mad at me one time. Actually, really did actually get mad because I didn't do the salvation prayer at the end of one service. And I was like, if it's become that, yeah, I don't know. I am so drawn away from formula. I'm so drawn towards Jesus. We had a guy at Bible study one time who goes, hey, I read something this week. Can I read it to you guys? We're like, yeah. He's like, okay, I'll read it to you. So he goes to his Bible, brand new Bible, crisp, brand new Bible. And he opens and he's like, have you guys ever read, oh, here it is. Have you guys ever read John 3? And I'm like, don't you dare. He's like, 16? And we're like, everybody's read John 3:16, but he had read it. How beautiful is this? Dude, he had read literally the most famous verse in the Bible, and when he read it, it grabbed him.
Yeah.
And he had that experience. And why? It wasn't because I stood in and said, you have to read this, you have to do that. He was a guy who'd found a community where he felt safe. He was learning about who is Jesus, what does this mean? And he'd had an encounter with Jesus at an intimate level that was so exciting, he wanted to bring it to a group of people and pass it along. And I'm like, that's us. If you want to know what we are, that right there. And if you do oil, or if you do this, or if you do that, or if you're great, I'm for you. If you're teaching Jesus, go for it. If you want to dance and scream, if you want to have fog machines, I don't care. Great. But if you want to know who we are, we're a guy who has been a good guy his whole life, found Jesus, read John 3:16, and is excited about it.
Yeah.
That's who we are.
Yeah. Man, that's cool.
And like I said, unless the church is built, how do you express that to people? Because I knew that. Yeah. I knew that when I was 17 years old, that I didn't want this, that I did want that. And it's taken a long time for God to sort of sand the rough edges up. But I've known my whole life that I wasn't a church person.
I've gotten so used to, the feel of Shiloh, the vibe of, hey, whatever, just come and experience it. And just that I've actually gone to other places to, take a class or to, see a speaker or something like that. And it's weird, the very friendly people thing,
right.
The thing of almost you're talking like you would come up and talk to me because you feel like you have to. And then we're both kind of looking at each other like, we both don't want this.
You're not enjoying this. I'm not enjoying this.
Yeah.
Well, we should stop.
Yeah. I mean, I love the feel of, you come in and it's kind of like the head nod, like, hey,
right,
you're here too. That's cool.
I've wondered, I've gone back and forth of like, are we strict enough? Because like, I know places, there are religions, like if you don't pay your tithe that week, they're going to come to your house.
What?
Oh yeah. I was having this conversation a couple weeks ago. The gal, her family had grown up in a different religion, and they'd come to your house and tell you how much you owed that week. What? Yeah. Yeah. And we're like the opposite of that. And I'm like, do we keep people accountable enough? Like maybe
you're not going to get your salvation box this month.
We're going to
pay your subscription.
Yeah. And so I'm like, if we err, it's going to be on the side of low social expectation, low social pressure. I feel no expectation to organize people's social lives. When people are like, you know what we need to start? I'm like, nothing. We need to start nothing. We need to keep it simple. You go have friends. Don't be like a religious weirdo where your entire social circle is in the church. No, keep it simple. Stay outside. I don't want to organize your social life, but there's no social pressure. I want you to see Jesus, and then I want you to lean in moments where he speaks to you. That's what I want. And I want you to know that if you are bad for the rest of your life, that Jesus is good, and that's the secret. That's the trick. Not that we all collectively agree that we're all going to do this or say that or go here or be there. Like maybe we miss it a little to the left or a little to the right, but I know we love Jesus, and I know we're reaching people that weren't being reached. And this has become national. Like people are like, I'm watching, and like I'm not a church person, but that makes sense.
Yeah, the first communication I think I've ever felt from the Lord was at Shiloh. And it was the thing that made me grab Levi and be like, hey, you want to see if we could figure out this video stuff?
That's it though. That's it. And if you wait and you watch people's lives be literally transformed then you're like, okay, then we're okay. Maybe we're a little this way, or maybe we're a little that way. Maybe we do a little less than we should over here, a little more than we should, maybe. But are people finding a real Jesus and understanding a real gospel? Because if the answer to that is yes, I don't want to change. I don't want to change anything if that's the case. If people are experiencing a personal Jesus, then I don't want to adjust.
So what's your statement to the people that are asking, when is it, going to go back to live?
That's a fair question. And I actually love that because I feel loved. I don't know very many pastors that are as loved as I am. I feel so grateful that I get to be the pastor of Shiloh because I think it's a combination of two things. I'm loved, and then they kind of roll their eyes at some of my craziness. Like there's some sort of a hybrid combo. But what I want to do is I want people to take accountability of the seats that they sit in as being the community. Like those people, that is the community. Not we're here to listen to an expert. Jacob, Levi, and that whole crew have done a great job. Keto, you are exactly right. I tell you what, someday that is going to be the podcast. We're going to sit down and I'm going to ask you the questions because without it, think about it. Think about what's our viewership? Like, it's crazy. But here's my point. That is such a big part of where we're going that I like preaching live. I don't know if people know that or not. I 1,000 times prefer preaching to a group of faces and people. I love that so much. And if we can get to a place where it's sort of a combo of all of it, where the live literally, because imagine if you came to church one Sunday and they just shut down and didn't tell you. You're like, I came to church today, and it didn't have church that week. That's how I'd feel if we didn't make the online available on a weekly basis. It can't be inconsistent. And so to answer the question, like I don't know that I can spell it out. I know what the vision is. It's a simple path to Jesus. If that means live, if that means video, if that means that there are broken people finding an experience with Jesus, we're going to lean into that. The method, that's the principle. The principle is a simple path to Jesus. The method is going to kind of vary, but it's done that since the beginning. We've done that since the start, is we kind of find the method of how to accomplish the original principle. Hey, quick compliment. I love the new music and new videos. Great work. Thank you. How about it? Do you know that this was the first week in the history of Shiloh, in the 8.5 history of Shiloh, that we started singing I'll Fly Away. There was drums, because you can't have drums in this building. It's really difficult. I mean, literally everyone starts clapping, and Lacey and I were like, they can do it.
I'm so proud of them.
Well, we kept it like so acoustic. Like it's such an acoustic set in our worship that to be able to add those instruments and stuff and then go back to a hymn that's familiar. Tracy, I totally agree. And like the way that it's presented, the angles and the musicians and like it was
crazy when we were filming that, because of the way the sound is and stuff. That wasn't the first one. There was no chairs in there or something too. So it was literally just the concrete floor, and he started playing the drums, and it's
terrible live.
It's so bad because the sound is literally bouncing off every surface of the room. There was one point where I walked in and I immediately turned around because it sounded like he was playing from behind me.
Yeah. But that's what's so crazy though. Go back to your point. Like if it hadn't been for you and Levi and the vision of what media was going to be here, then the reality is worship that we're talking about wasn't going to be possible here, because musicians that are busy on the weekends, we can actually create a better worship package. And I used to say, I wish worship was performed by people that were in a different room. I used to say that because I'm like, I get so tired of the performance-y. Like if you've ever been to a church where someone's really caught up in the image of worship, it's a distraction. Like I feel like it's hard for me to look past that person and see Jesus. I was like, man, it'd be cool if the worship was just in a different room, so collectively everybody's on the same page. It's like God was preparing us for like what we're starting to do now. I still like live, and I like the worship videos too. Don't fix it if it's not broke. You and Shiloh are not broke. Just amazing with the words and sermons. Just amazing. She should be on staff. She needs to be like, okay, ready? We're going live. Say a bunch of nice things. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a hybrid. I mean, and what I like is the faces of people that are, Arizona in the winter, or like what we're seeing with the online thing. The reason that's so cool is that I feel like it's a genuine connection to Jesus, and to the tune of thousands. Powell, Butte was never going to be able to reach that many people geographically. We were never going to be able to reach that amount of numbers of people like us, because you can't drive 9 hours every Sunday to church. it's allowed us to access people that are not necessarily being hotly pursued because they're in areas that are never going to support a big church, and it's hard to send pastors out there.
Yeah.
We're actually able to produce a church service that's meaningful to people that wouldn't be able to have maybe church otherwise.
Yeah. It's actually cool. When we first were talking about, okay, we want to do services in small communities, we immediately were thinking, okay, how do we live stream? And it came down to the Wi-Fi speed out of this building. It was like, we actually cannot live stream because it's not fast enough.
Right.
And then it kind of, it all happened at the same time where we realized, wait, if we can't live stream,
they
can't stream it.
Right.
Like that defeats the entire purpose. So we would pre-record, services and videos and that kind of stuff and put them on a USB, and we literally mailed it a couple times to places. Because if we're talking about the Bible that's been around for thousands of years, then a sermon that's a week old doesn't matter. Because we're not talking about pop culture stuff.
That's
Sometimes
exactly right. And we try to avoid like current event type stuff because of that exact thing. Like then I'm focusing too much on what I see. I need to stay in the word. I need to stay in the gospel, because you want to hear something crazy. We're going to have to wrap this up. I know we're going long, but I've sat in Wickenburg and listened to a sermon that I'd preached like 6 months before. And it's so embarrassing because there's people around, like it's dark, but like there's tears coming down. I'm like, I'd forgotten that. I needed to hear that. It's like I'm literally preaching to myself 6 months later, and I'm like, I'm sorry, God. Yeah. Like, it is a powerful thing to see God use something that was not dated. It's not like Jesus was this way today, but he's gonna be different tomorrow. Like, to me, I've sat there and felt the weight of like I had gotten away from that. I knew that was true at one point, and I'd gotten away from it. I needed reminded, and so I feel like I've got to be the recipient of that.
Yeah, that's cool. You said one time about a verse that kind of had the heart of Shiloh. I'm going to get everything wrong, but there was a tree that somebody climbed up to see Jesus. Mm-hmm.
Zacchaeus. Jesus was walking, and a group of people who were present but not necessarily followers. They were just wanting to get close to Jesus. They were like the crowd. And Zacchaeus was little. He was a short guy. And he crawled up the tree because he just wanted to observe. I mean, he could have pushed his way through a crowd, but he just wanted to see Jesus from a safe spot. And, I heard a guy one time preach a sermon about how that seed went into the ground years before. When's the best time to plant a tree? 10 years ago. So God had put a tree in place so that when Zacchaeus said, I just want a safe spot to observe Jesus, he gets up in the tree and Jesus goes, Zacchaeus, and it became personal. But if we can just represent, if the church that we are a part of can just be the tree, that's it. I just want a safe spot where people might listen and go, nope, I don't believe it, I'm out. Fine, that's fine. But when you come into a church, you've already made some sort of a commitment. Like, what if we just presented it in a way that Jesus could reach that person and you guys take it from here. Just a safe spot to observe.
What is that verse? Do you know?
I mean, it's the story of Zacchaeus. It's probably in all the Gospels.
Yeah.
I'd have to look.
Levi or Mary, could you Google the verse for Zacchaeus and the tree? Jason,
I'm so sorry.
I don't either. So.
All right. Well, it's in there. You can Google it. I'm getting text messages from. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But anyway, I thought that was perfect.
That's a safe spot. It's a safe spot to see Jesus. And so then we give food away, and that reaches people that are like, what goes on there? What goes on there if they're giving food away? Mm-hmm. Are you giving it to church people? No. In fact, we're asking church people to give it away. Sunday, we gave away like 250 pounds of hamburger. We sent it home with people. If you know people that need this, take it to them. Mm-hmm. If you're in a bind and you need food, keep it. But take this to someone. That is such a safe spot to observe Jesus. Like if you get a package of hamburger and you're like, why are you giving this to me? It's just something that our church does.
Yeah.
That's a tree that allows you to observe Jesus.
Yeah. Luke 19, by the way.
I constantly go through the sermons on YouTube and go out to do irrigation. I'm constantly learning new things, and it brings such peace to my day. DJ, I do the same thing. I put on podcasts. Like I learn so much more with my headphones on because I can be doing other stuff. Like I can be saddling or feeding or doing whatever I'm doing. And with my headphones on, I'm so glad there again, that's a perfect example of another method. The principle of Jesus never changes, but the method of how we access people or how we make it visible or simple is always going to be kind of constantly updating.
Yeah. I mean, I know, you've said this, and then it's been so true in my life of reading the Bible, but then, imagining in your head, like, okay, imagine real people. Imagine the story. Imagine that you're actually reading a book and imagining the place and the environment, the smells, the feels, the characters of the Bible actually acting this out, because it's thick.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real story. And I know I've, felt and learned so much about God through online stuff and, other people explaining parts of the Bible and putting, the Bible in,
drawing you into that story.
Exactly. Through online, that it's almost, you can recommend videos to people, and it's almost like a more accurate, a sharper weapon, it feels like, of the word, than going to it, I mean, it always feels good live, but it's like it's a gamble almost.
Well, okay, and don't get me wrong. I think everybody loves live the best. That's a preference, but we're not a preference-driven church. We're a missional church. We're going to go here before the day is over, but that's Jason. I mean, Jason's sitting here in the room with us, one of our favorite people here, and that was online. I mean, talk about being at a place where God was trying to draw him. It says the Bible says that God places the lonely into families. And like Jason and everything that he's gone through in his family, and that God reached out, found him, and was trying to draw him into a community. Well, how's Jason going to walk into a community? Jason, he's not going to walk in back, hey, everybody, I'm here. He does, like, there's people that come here now that, who's that bear wearing people clothes in the back? Well, but the online was this sort of a go-between. Yeah. That now he's a part of the community. It's hard to even imagine Shiloh without him and his family and like his little adorable grandkids and stuff. But it was the online that was sort of like, we're going to put this outside. If you want it, great. It's kind of like putting it out for people that are like, I'm not coming into your house. No problem. Here, it's out there. Yeah. Well, why is it out here? Because we still think it's important. We still think you like it,
Yeah. I mean, that's so cool. Because I know, dude, if I'm going anywhere, if I'm going to eat at a new restaurant, I like look it up online first. And if there's a video of the restaurant, I'm more likely to go there.
Yeah.
So a church, I mean, I know people that are just, I have so much respect for people that are just, I'll just go to a church.
Can you imagine being like that? Can you imagine, like, you want to go somewhere? Yeah, sure. What do you wear? Where do you walk? How do you, like, what is your...
I know people that did that alone.
I just can't imagine.
Neither can I.
I can't. Like, I'm so not that way. And like, hey, if you're one of those people that can just go somewhere, great. I just can't imagine. The self-conscious part of what would go on. So
yeah. That's what I got.
I've actually got a board meeting, and they've texted me that they are starting without me if we don't get off here.
Okay, well then, the board meeting, we're reaching people here.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, board.
Yeah, sorry, board. Thank you everybody for joining. Share this with a friend or something.
Yeah, you can take the online and share it.
Yeah, that's the whole point. See you guys.